I thought that this coronavirus would be one issue that didn't really care about identity, the identity wars that we've been having over the last decades now. I thought
I don't think it
coronavirus.
does. I mean, I don't think it does care who you are. I mean, honestly, like with the, with the people who have been dying, like, you know, celebrities versus, like just regular people. It's like, yeah, we're all humans, so the virus really doesn't care who you are.
But even
And
just the reopening is starting to lead into a partisan war.
Yeah.
well, yeah, because there's science versus money. That's what we're dealing with.
Again, I think that it's fascinating that when we talk about it, we seem to lose sight unconsciously of the basic fact that the huge majority of the people who get it recover.
Or don't even show symptoms.
Talk about it as if we really talk about it as if there was a huge risk of dying from it. And obviously, by this time, more and more of us know of or know somebody who has died from it. But still, in a statistical sense, that risk is not very high.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm sure people have seen me make many a comment on this subject. I just one thing I try to remind people is, the case fatality rate alone isn't the whole story. I'm like, in addition to the fact that there's potentially, long-term or permanent damage that that some people are suggesting may come about as a result of it. There's also the matter that, like, if the flu has a 0.1% case fatality rate, but we have a vaccine for it, a lot of people have natural built up some natural immunity to it. It's a bit of a different thing than when a novel virus that no one has any immunity to and that there is no vaccine for is coming through. Because even if you only have a 0.1% case fatality rate and it has a large effective reproduction number, the R that people talk about, or sometimes people say R naught, which is the basic reproduction number, which is different than what the effective is. So like here, we've been trying to lower the effective reproduction number with these measures that we've been doing. And so if you have a disease that is as contagious as this seems to be, it will go through the population. It will infect a much larger percentage of the population than the seasonal flu does. And so even if they had the exact same case fatality rate, you could still end up with an order of magnitude larger number of deaths if you have an order of magnitude larger number of infections. And I'm like, again, it's still a matter of, at some point you do have to make trade-offs, unfortunately. But I think that is one thing. I hear so much talk about the case fatality rate, and it is something obviously to consider. But it's certainly not the whole story. And I really quickly, one thing I wanted to mention about the Chelsea study about the people being checked at the square. One thing is I was wondering how representative that sample might be if you have these people that are out on the street, and if they're out on the street, maybe they were more likely to have been not social distancing to begin with, or staying in their home, so they may not be representative of the whole population.
The way I look at this, it's not the coronavirus itself that I think a lot of people are have a lot of hesitancy towards, but it's sort of the domino effect. Like the biggest practical consideration, at least for me, is not that me or anyone in my family will get coronavirus and die from it, but it's the fact that the hospitals in the area in, say, again, 2 or 3 weeks, because people go to the hospital, and I have, a lot of older people in my family who frankly go to the hospital pretty often. It's thinking about if there's some type of medical problem, how do they get to the hospital in time? Yeah. Or just what's the procedure when everything is running slower, and we're not quite sure how the logistics work. for me, the actual virus, not as worried about it, but just the string of things that it affects, that's a much bigger concern.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I think has been lost a little bit in these conversations is people saying that we overreacted, which is one of those things that we just don't know at this point. But also in the context of when a lot of these decisions were being made, we were seeing what was happening in Italy, and Italy did seem to have an overwhelmed hospital system. And I think that erring on the side of caution certainly made a lot of sense in terms of trying to flatten the curve. But I think James would probably make the argument and make it better than I can that it seems like there may have been a bit of moving of the goalposts since then, though, where before it was we wanted to flatten the curve and make sure we weren't overwhelming the hospital system, and now in some parts it does seem like if one more death might occur through reopening, then it's we can't reopen.
Well, I guess another thing I would say is it seems to me a default position that we should be optimistic that the I would not want to be the coronavirus right now with the entire human hive mind out after me. We got through, and David maybe could speak to this, but and maybe our own sophistication is our enemy, but in 1918, we got through it. We got through it in 1957, 1968. Even in 2017, we had quite a few deaths from infectious flu. And it's just so fascinating to me that we've had this incredible reaction to it. And I guess I would just say it wasn't necessarily based on the nature of the disease as it was on, we know so much more now. And we're so much further removed from like the real nitty gritty of life that in 1918, if you had a family, people would get swept away by this or that. Death was just much more present, and life was much closer to the ground than we are now. And this amazing sort of attack on our whole structure.
I'm really wondering what my grandfather, you mentioned family, and in 1918, I'm really wondering what my great-grandfather family felt during that time. He died from the Spanish flu. It just so happened he was like my age. So it does hit a little bit closer to home as far as like, oh my goodness, I'm, almost 40 and here we are at another pandemic. But like you said, technology and just innovation were surviving us. And while we have a lot of information, it's surprising how much disinformation is still flowing too. And I'm just wondering, is there any way to weed through that?
We need better sense-making apparatus, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, it might lead to a real full-out scientific attack on this kind of virus. And again, there are a lot of things we don't talk about. We've been making flu vaccines now for 40 plus years. And we spend a lot of money on them, presumably. And the effect doesn't seem to be much more than marginal, as far as I can tell. And we're happy with that. But now, maybe there will be more pressure to be a little more creative and try some new approaches and maybe come up with something that will be more effective. Mm-hmm. But James is absolutely right, of course. I mean, in 1918, people died of various different infections all the time. And let's see, 6 years after that, in 1923, my mother's mother died of postpartum stress right after having the first child. And that was a frequent killer. And now, my ex-wife actually, my wife was so that was just one of many things.
I just want to say, I'm like, just because of the way things have been done in the past doesn't, I'm like, also we have more information, but it's also just because something was done a certain way in the past doesn't necessarily mean that it was the right way to do it. I'm like, but also it seems like they did take a lot of, or some areas did do a lot of the social distancing practices that we do now during the Spanish flu from reports that, or news clippings that have been shared.
So Philadelphia, there were two cities, right? What was the other city? I think Philadelphia and St. Louis. Yeah, and they were like parallel cities. Philadelphia didn't honor social distancing. I'm from Philadelphia, and my great grandfather that I mentioned, he was a police officer in Philadelphia during that time, and I think he was at that parade where social distancing wasn't being honored. Meanwhile, what did St. Louis do?
They shut
closed down a lot of things.
Yeah.
I did a ProQuest search just yesterday, newspaper search, and I posted a collection of articles. I saw a lot more articles. And there were various different measures in various different places. Now, the horrifying thing about that one was the number of young men who were killed in army camps, which was huge, which of course were perfect for it. And that was one thing. But I was struck that I saw a lot of headlines about medical personnel telling the public not to panic. Quite different, I would say, from what we're getting now. And of course, this was never the #1 news story at that time. There was a little thing going on called the First World War, which specifically was drawing more attention as it reached its climax.
What part of the problem we have now is that the pessimists can't be wrong. That if we end up having as many deaths as they predicted, then they'll say, well, we told you this was going to happen. And if we have a lot fewer, they're going to say, oh, well, the reason that happened is because you listened to us and followed our instructions. And for the optimists, it's kind of the opposite. They can't win, because if it's fewer, people are going to say, oh, it's only because we stopped. And if there's more, then they're going to say, you people are fools, you should have listened to us. So it's an interesting psychological problem to have, that the pessimists are going to be right either way, and the optimists are going to be wrong either way.
Well, I don't know, because I feel like it feels to me like the other side of it, where it's like if we limit the amount of deaths, I feel like everybody's going to. I feel like there's going to be a sentiment among a large portion of the population that we overreacted. I don't think that people are going to come around to the idea that, oh, maybe our mitigation factors are responsible for this. I see it now daily in conversations where people are saying this hasn't killed that many people, and they're comparing it to the models that came out, the models that specified that this was if we didn't do anything. And so I feel like that there's like in a lot of these conversations, I feel like there's no way to have a serious conversation about it, because if we're comparing projection models for scenarios where nothing was done and saying, see, look how completely they overreacted compared to what we're seeing now, and it's like, but those were projections for different scenarios. Like you're not comparing apples to apples. I don't know. It will be. I think unfortunately, I think a lot of people are just going to come out at the under end of this, viewing it through the ideology that they came in viewing it. Like for instance, there's a lot of people who want to say this is all Trump's fault, and that's, of course, that's not the case. This would have happened, and there would probably be a lot of the same problems that we're having now. He could have. I would imagine that he could have done things better. It certainly seems like that, particularly in the years prior to this, the things that he did to lessen our preparedness. But on the other hand, there's the people who are saying, well, the WHO and the CDC, they're all responsible for this. This shouldn't have even ever have happened, because the CDC, it stands for Disease Center for Disease Control and Protection and Prevention. But it's like that. I think sometimes we overestimate the amount. I think there's just a certain amount of this that was going to happen regardless, and there's no. As much as we love to blame certain people, that at some point there's just some things that can't be blamed on a person or an organization. And I don't know.
Everything good should have been done sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's how I want to say, though, the criticism about reacting too slowly is both true and false. And the reason I say that is that historically, no large organization or society ever reacts to anything but slowly to something completely new and dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a given. Yes, there's always one poor son of a bitch in the middle of the bureaucracy who understands what's happening and starts screaming, and he never gets listened to until it's much too late.
But I guess one of my things is that health experts seem to have been screaming this for a long time. I'm like, I know I've been concerned about pandemics for a very long time. When I have conversations with libertarians, pandemics was like my number one or number two reason, along with climate change, for why I just did not think that an anarchist or libertarian society was that feasible, because of the possibility of I just didn't see them being able to react to a pandemic in a responsible manner.
What is a libertarian response?
The free market, with the free market deal with that, I'm assuming. I don't know, because a lot of when I bring this up to a lot of libertarians, I think that they feel that they've been proven right in this situation too, where they feel that the government's overreached a lot, and they were focused on the fear of how civil liberties could be threatened in this type of situation, which I think are certainly well-founded fears, and not unreasonable, but I think that they underestimate how much work, how disorganized and chaotic it would be, even if you had a relatively dysfunctional government, at least giving the semblance of the fact that there's some order to the chaos. Whereas I don't know that we would necessarily see that in a more libertarian response, where it's like, let people do whatever they want to do, especially in with respect to our culture, where I think like people are looking at the Swedish model and they're being like, look at how hands off they're being, and but they also seem to have a much higher degree of solidarity within their culture than we do here.
I find that funny, because we look at the Swedish model for a lot of other things. The socialist.
Well, and what's funny too is that a lot of people who, when people on the left cite the Swedish model, the pushback is they have a completely different culture. You can't replicate that here, because they have a much smaller population, they have a much different culture. And then now we're seeing it on the flip side, where people want to cite the Swedish model for this response, but now we're forgetting that, again, there's a difference in population, there's a difference in culture.
Facts are relative.
Tommy, the thing is, there's a lot of difference between telling somebody you have to go to the restaurant as opposed to telling them you can go to the restaurant. So it puts the decision making back on the individual, which up until a few weeks ago, that's the way we made decisions. I mean, that's kind of what freedom means, that we assume certain risks when we walk out the door.
Because I think that a lot of the analogies that have been used have been quite inappropriate, but I think one of the fairer analogies is with traffic accidents. The fact is that I think about the last time I checked the CDC, like 32,000 people a year die from traffic accidents. We don't get rid of cars. We don't shut down roads. We say that we're allowing a certain level of risk in order to have the freedom to drive. And so I mean, like, I think that there's obviously, I think it's a balance that has to be. Oh, but my point that I wanted to make about the bureaucrat waving the screaming the alarm is the issue for me is the fact that there have been so many health experts for years saying that we needed to be better prepared for when this eventually happened, and we know that the NSC got rid of their pandemic response team. We know that we had an embedded health expert who focused on disease, on monitoring disease outbreaks in China that we got rid of at the end of last year. And one of the things that I find so striking is that we're complaining about how much the Chinese government can't be trusted to give us accurate information. And I just think that just highlights how important it was that we had an embedded expert of our own there on the ground monitoring these things that would have been so valuable to us when this happened. And so I hope that what we might learn out of this is the importance of preparation. And yeah, I mean, like, I think that there's some things that are hindsight is 2020, but then there are things like for instance, like knowing that it was going to be a coronavirus, that was the pandemic. That might be one thing that is like hindsight is 2020. You couldn't have known which family of viruses it was going to be that was going to be the pandemic. But like some of the more basic stuff seemed like,
Yeah, I want to cut in with sort of 2 points there. One, with regard to that person, that we that they moved out. Actually, both in the Obama administration and in the Bush administrations, they actually had also removed that office, but then reinstated it. And really the difference is that this time it wasn't reinstated because there is this tendency to try and figure out what's necessary and what isn't. And, and after, I guess, some period of time, they, you I guess, take that scalpel or, a saw, whatever analogy you want to use, and you try to, get rid of the unnecessary portions. But there's that point. And then to the other point about 1918, and even to your point about traffic accidents, there's this concept of, network science, which is pretty much that if you look at people or you can turn anything into like a node, for instance. And because of the amount of travel happening around the world, something like a virus, I think a lot of this response is really a response. It's a reaction to the fact that we don't know really who's around us like before. I think that has a lot to do with what some people might see as an overreaction to, shut everything down. And all of that. I don't know. It's, I think at the end of the day, to your point, and we talked about with David, that I think a lot of it is just before we had trust in the scientists on it, and we didn't really worry about making that determination ourselves. I think that's really the key difference here. I tend to think that a lot of this stuff, it's not, people want to be able to iron it out themselves, but to be honest, again, just as somebody who, has been in the room with a lot of experts, we make a lot of decisions every day on issues that are so like specialized in terms of the area, like it's boring stuff, but we trust other people to do it. But when it comes to something like this, everybody wants to, sort of wrestle with it themselves and make a determination. And I just think that's sort of, I don't know, it's entertaining, I guess.
So where do we go from here? That's the big question.
I don't know, but I just want to share a thought I just had, and I had not had it before and all that. Imagine what a nightmare it would be politically if Hillary Clinton were president. I mean, that really might break up the country. It seems to be.
Right.
You think it would go and feed into the conspiracies of them trying to deliberately?
Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The death panels will make a return.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, what? Explain this again.
The death panels. You don't remember that from the Obama era when he first? Oh, I don't have any stats.
Sarah Palin was very big on death panels.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sarah Palin, Glenn Beck, a lot of them. Yeah.
Right.
That's yes.
No, I don't think that would be the accusation. But the accusation would be, this is their excuse to bring the UN and the helicopters in and take all our freedom away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, they're making that argument now, but it's just a little bit harder to make. Without Hillary. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it would be an easier argument to make if Hillary was. Yeah.
I want to get this question in real quick, but I mean, when everything opens back up where you guys are, I mean, how are you going to, I guess, address being out of the house, like what James was saying, having that choice of where to go yourself. Are you guys going to continue to sort of stay in the house, or, just hang out at the park away from people? Or are you going to start, going to the barber shop, or doing a lot of the same things that you were doing before?
I don't know. And the fantasy I keep having, half seriously, is wouldn't it be nice just to get it and be sick for a couple of weeks and get well and be over with? And actually, I can't remember if I've shared this in the page. I think I did, but there's at least a slight chance that I did get it. Because I was sick very, very briefly, not seriously. But there are people like that. So I'm definitely eager to get an antibody test at the first chance I get. But if I haven't had it, the answer to your question, Darius, is I really don't know. I think that's going to be a tough one.
I'm waiting for a treatment. See, this part of my optimism.
Right.
I think we're going to have a treatment fairly soon. I'm surprised it hadn't come already, but there's going to be some treatment combination of hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, something I don't even know about, the serum, getting antibodies.
Again, it's going to be extremely, unless it's a real miracle cure, it's going to be very hard to identify it, again, since 95% of people will recover anyway.
Well, I'll let you guys be the first to get this vaccine and do the treatment and all that. I'll be on the second.
Yeah, exactly. I don't trust any new things. It has to be like second edition, third edition, and then maybe.
Right. The
I
zombies.
consider it.
Is it I Am Legend? The zombies in I Am Legend were created from the treatment of the virus.
I think this is a real difference between you guys and boomers, because if you remember being in the first cohort of polio vaccines, various other things, you don't have this feeling. And I can remember when my doctor quite recently said, "Do you want the shingles vaccine?" And I almost jumped up clapping and said, "Oh, bring it on."
I think it's because we've seen too many movies where it's like, this experiment has gone horribly wrong, and you've got eyes over here.
We don't know how. You're in Atlanta, James. I mean, that's where they shoot Walking Dead. We really don't know how that happened.
They haven't explained it yet.
We don't know what?
How the zombies occurred in The Walking Dead.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's that whole thing with, it's the zombie apocalypse thing. I mean, that's been a huge trend, just to sort of veer off a little bit here. That's been a huge, like,
of course, y'all are showing some libertarian attitudes, which is, nobody can make me take that vaccine.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm like I think a lot of medical professionals would agree that, you don't force that. That's a huge foundation of medical ethics is, not forcing. Although a lot of people that are using that argument about, my body, my choice, are talking about their children and making their choice for their child. But yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back around to, like, I know we've talked about optimistic, pessimistic, libertarian, anarchist. I think a lot of it is just a way of trying to answer the question, how can I make myself as safe as possible, more so than, more than anything else. And some people have the idea that there are some actions that the government may take, like, again, forcible, vaccination, or saying, if you want to come back out to certain parts of the public, you have to get this vaccine. It's just a lot of people trying to do the calculus on all the different risks. And it's really to David's point, just for myself, I know Cole's not here, but he was working at the Board of Elections before this happened, and a lot of the judges, election judges, would bring this to his attention because, of course, they skew quite a bit older. And they were asking what their contingency plan was. And I mean, I guess it was early March or late February, and they hadn't done anything yet. And so it's just that thing of, even when we get back to our lives, just things like, if he goes back to working at the board, how's that going to work? Because we did not sit 6 feet apart. We shared a little cubicle with someone else. So a lot of that, I think, you think 2 or 3 steps ahead, and you realize there's still a lot to consider as far as making your decisions.
Fear is the enemy, you know, fear of what it's going to do to my kid, fear of what it's going to do to me.
Yeah.
You know, we can't wait for a vaccine. I mean, the people that are looking for that certainty, that's at least 18 months away, to what I understand.
Yeah.
We've got to go back to normal life before then, which means at some point we've got to assume some risk.
Yeah.
Well, we're wrapping this up. So this is a crisis, and I'm thinking about my favorite president and your favorite president, David, FDR. What did he say? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for joining us on this special chat, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it.